looking right now, going through a kind of a survey way of the book of Judges, and noticed a little bit about the outline, several different ways that you could look at that. Going through a content outline, sort of like what is pointed out there. Or when you talk about the cycles of what takes place in the book of Joshua. Somebody tell me, basically, what are we looking at in the book of Joshua? What happens? All right. We have the people fall away. They turn away from God. Usually another generation arises that knows not God, or they forget about things. Then what happens after that? All right. There's the anger. There's the ones brought against them. And then the people cry out to be delivered. And what does God do? Sends them a judge. And that judge then delivers them from the oppressor. And then what happens? After they return to God, they have a time of peace. And then after that time of peace, what happens again? Go right back into the sin and idolatry and going away from the will of God. That's the cycle that you see repeatedly taking place. You have the judges listed, as we pointed out last time, Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, we looked at on Wednesday night. Deborah with Barak and Gideon we'll look at today, Lord willing, and then continue Gideon on Wednesday night and go from there. We talked about the areas in which these judges were present. That when you look at them, you're looking at not simply a judge over all of Israel necessarily. In the case of Samuel, you see that. In the case of some others, you see that, Eli. But you don't see that in the case of all of those judges. Sometimes they're just in a particular area. Let's look at Judges chapter 4 when we talk about Deborah. Somebody tell me what chapter 4 is about. What happens at the beginning? Verse 1 that gets our cycle started. All right. People turned to evil again. Children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They then have an oppressor who is brought against them. Who's that? Okay, what nation? All right, you have those that are brought against them of the Canaanites, Jabin the king of them, and he has someone who is a commander in his army by the name of Sisera that is being used in that way. How strong were they? Were they just kind of a weak army, didn't have much equipment? Okay, 900 chariots of iron that are there, so that's a pretty strong group of people. Now, if they're a strong group of people, then surely God's going to send some mighty, huge, strong guy that's very powerful to oppose that oppressor, right? And what happens? Who does he send? All right, Deborah is sent. Deborah asked for Barak to come, but the point is made by her, I will surely go with you, she says to Barak, after Barak says, I'm not going unless you go. And so she says, I'll go with you. Nevertheless, there will be no glory for you in the journey you are taking. For the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. Now, that's not just a sexist statement, as some might call it. What is it pointing at? Who did God give leadership to from the start? The men. And in a nation, if a woman was the leader, what was seen of that nation? Yeah. Men won't lead. That must be something that is a lacking in power. That was weakness that's being seen. Let me suggest to you, when you look at much of the world today, you still see that same thing. The rest of the world does not see things as much as the Western world does. Even in the time of the Western world getting the beginnings of those who were women as leaders, Margaret Thatcher, I remember. There was a fairly sizable group in the British Kingdom that talked about the fact that Britain had gone down in its power. It was become a nothing empire because of this. That was the way in which it was seen. That power is lacking if there was a woman in leadership. Now, why did God choose a woman in Deborah to lead them? Do what? All right. He was the power that was behind this. So the idea is he's showing them that through this woman, I'm going to bring you down. Now, when that happens, and we're going to point out another woman was involved in some of that with Sisera. But when that happens, then all the rest of them look on, those nations that had seen this as being the evidence of weakness on Israel's part. What do they see now? The only way this can happen as far as they're concerned is what? Their God must be powerful. That must have been how they were delivered. So that's the intent of all of this as he goes into being involved in this. Now, after you've got this statement that's made, they come into warfare, and what happens as they come in warfare? Barak goes out with men, and what happens? All right, they're routed. How badly? How many of the Canaanites left? Not a one left. An absolute defeat. Now, Sisera is fleeing from them on foot. There's no chariots or anything to help him at this point. He's going on foot, goes to the house of one who was of the family of Moses' wife. They had been supporting, kind of quietly it seems on the side, this leader of the Canaanites. And she allows Sisera to come in, puts him under a rug. He says, now, when the people of Israel come, what do you say to them? Oh, nobody's here. But he gets under that rug, and what does she do instead? All right, gets a tent peg, hammer, and hammers that peg right through the temple of his head. And as a result, he dies, and the effect of that is what? Same thing. As you see the leadership that's there of Deborah, there's a recognition that God has been involved in all of this, and there has been power that's been given to these people because of God's intervention. In verse 23, at the very end of Judges 4, so on that day God subdued Jabin, king of Canaan, in the presence of the children of Israel, and the hand of the children of Israel grew stronger and stronger against Jabin, king of Canaan, until they had destroyed Jabin, king of Canaan. Well, they had destroyed him before, hadn't they? How many people were left? 0 who had gone out in the battle. However, does that say that all of the people went out into battle? This is one of those where I've seen several times those who try to make contradictions in the Bible or suggest that, say, well, killed all of them and now it says he waxes stronger over them. You see, the Bible has its contradictions. No, it doesn't. There were 0 left of the army, but you still had others that were behind, and what happened? There was a continuation of that strength being seen with Canaan until there's absolute domination in every sense. Anybody got anything else there? All right, that's chapter 4. What's chapter 5? Oh, didn't hurt. All right. Song of Deborah and Barak, which is also just called what? Song of Deborah, as you see it several times, and noted here, really, verse 3 there, I will praise the Lord. What is this whole thing about?
God the glory for the victory. Giving God the glory.
Okay, giving God the glory for this victory that was there. What does it do? I mean, how does it accomplish this? How's a song put together? You got verses in a song, don't you? Go ahead.
Well, it goes through and shows how the people were called. It talks about the ones that responded well, the ones that did not, and then comes to this crescendo of the simple woman in her home being the pinnacle of turning the tide, and how all of that comes back to God.
All right. When you look at this whole thing, what it is in our language, the poetic and the kind of a metering of this whole thing is not same, but you have this kind of a pace of a song that is given, this kind of a thing that's involved in what the poetic form is. And each verse of that really goes back, and as Angie pointed out, it's a little bit of their history. And in each point of their history, what do you see? God is the one who gave them the blessings that are to be had. That some of them turned against God, and sometimes there were people who did good, but God was the constant in this whole thing of there being a blessing that was given, and God's power is unlimited. And that really is something that comes to a point of making its ultimate statement in how God had delivered the people here through this woman, Deborah. It was Deborah who was brought to God in the place of being a simple woman who was doing what God said, but God used her by his power to do what he wanted to do. There's a particular point I also want to note, and this isn't a main part of it, but I want you to look at verse 19. The kings came and fought. The kings of Canaan fought. And it says they did that at Tanakh by the waters of... This is the first time you find a fight at Megiddo in the Old Testament time. In the conquest, there was a battle that was there, but I'm talking about those outside, now with the people in the land, and you have this kind of fighting that takes place in Megiddo. What happened at Megiddo in this particular case? That's where they came to a fight, and the latter part there of verse 20 points out Sisera's brought to his death. And if you look and you see where he fled from had to be right through the valley of Megiddo, the valley that was there by the city. Megiddo is on the side of a mountain. It really is in a high kind of a plain. It's there by Jezreel, and what you have is every single battle that's momentous in Israelite history that involves that area of northern Israel, every one of them will go right through that area by Megiddo. Why? Because that's the only place wide enough to have a valley and a breadth to where there can be a battle there. That's why this takes place. You have kings killed at Megiddo, and everything that is there suggests this is a place of extreme importance. A battle turns at Megiddo. That whenever you come there, whoever wins there wins the battle, because there's a finality about that. Okay, in the New Testament, what do we know about Megiddo, or something that sounds kind of like Megiddo? Okay. Harmageddo, or Harmageddon in the book of Revelation. And you hear a lot of people talking about, oh, that's the battle at the end of the world. You have this premillennial concept that you're going to have all nations of the earth and their armies join together there. Look and see how big that is. Number one, you couldn't even have our army there, much less anybody else's. You couldn't have all of Israel's army in that place. It's not a very big valley or plain that's there coming off of the Jezreel. What it is, though, is a central area in Israelite history that is standing for a great battle. If I said that man met his Waterloo there, what am I talking about? I'm asking you to go back into Napoleon's army, and what happened? It was a great defeat. We all know what a Waterloo is. Well, that's the same thing. Replace Megiddo for Waterloo, and you got it. That here is a point of a great battle. This is something that everything depends on. And more often than not, let me suggest something to you. Since Israel, the northern part, is where the people are who go away first, what do you think is going to happen up there? More often than not, defeats for the people of Israel rather than victories. And that's what you're going to see there. Anybody got anything on this Song of Deborah? Go ahead.
I find it just as a lesson for us to learn about our being brave and courageous and sticking with the fight. The way that the song portrays those who had every intention to participate but got distracted by the piping of the shepherds, and the others who came part of the way but couldn't even get off the ship. And then you've got the Asher comes and they stay on the seashore. They can't quite get there. And that can be us. At every point, I can have all the intentions in the world, but they didn't stand up. They're not Zebulun and Naphtali. They regarded their life as nothing to fight for this battle for the Lord, and to do that, and to see how that is described in that way, that it wasn't enough to want to be there. You needed to show up.
That's right.
And to have that depicted in this way. And in this case, those who followed Deborah and Barak and Jael showed up. And Jael, in her instance, she's actually going against her husband's political leanings to stand for the Lord. But she showed up. She did what she needed to do in the moment. She didn't hesitate. And those that did, God calls them out for their hesitation. You wanted to be here, but wanting to be here isn't enough.
Right.
You need to show up. And I think it's so beautifully done. And it makes, I want to look at myself and make sure I don't fall into the
That's right.
camp.
That's right. Intentions don't do it. We have to follow through. It's interesting, too, to me, in going through this, and I'm just going to real quick do this and then go on because we don't have a lot of time. But one of the things that you notice here is some tribes are commended, which later on are people who absolutely reject God. And some here are questioned that later are going to go on to do good things. It isn't your history that makes that determined either. It's what you do at that time. We can have a history. You know, I look back and I see the history of families, even some in this place, Bob and Tom and others that have been there. You know, you see these kind of things that a person has great faith, and they acted through great faith. But that doesn't necessarily mean their children are going to act that way. And it doesn't necessarily mean that somebody who was not what they should be is consigned to being that way for the rest of the time. They can be characters who step up and have great faith. I've lived long enough that I've seen that in the kingdom of Christ. That some of the people that I expected to be by my side in standing for truth are people who have gone by the way, and some of them, most notably who are like that, are sons of great preachers or elders or people of faith through their background, yet when it came time for them to stand, they didn't. And some of those that have been the greatest encouragement in standing for truth are those who, their parents may never have obeyed the gospel, or they didn't have any stand that was too much in generations past. They might have been from a real weak family, but when it came time for them to stood, they stood. And we need to keep that in our mind. It's not about what my dad or granddad or whoever else did. I've got a responsibility in my time to show the faith that's there and be a character of strength. All right. A lot of good lessons in the Song of Deborah that I wish we could go through every one of them. Chapter 6, tell me what happens then. We come now, and what happens in verse 1? And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of Midian for 7 years. The hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. Now, when that happened, now what do we see taking place? Go ahead.
They're oppressed greatly.
All right. They're oppressed. All of these things are there. So now, what's the next step according to our cycle? Do what? Okay. People cried out. Now they want to be delivered. And what happened? All right. All right. Same thing that happened back in the case of Deborah. He sent one who was a prophet or one that was a deliverer. In this case, what was his name? All right. Now, one of the things that you've got to see is some of the humor that is intended in this story, I think. Because you look and you find out here's Gideon. And he is threshing wheat. But where is he threshing wheat? In a wine press. Where do you normally thresh wheat? All right, out in the open air. I remember first time I ever went over into the Philippines, I saw them getting the rice. They had made the rice harvest there, and they were threshing it, against place that getting that head of the grain to come off. And then what do? They toss it in the air, and what happens then when you toss it in the air? The grain's heavy, the chaff is light, and it blows off. And they get that there, and they put a burn pile beside that, and they got some more over there, and they all have this concrete slab that's out there. And you run every once in a while around places, and you see this concrete slab, and I always wonder, what in the world did they put this concrete slab out here in the middle of fields for? And didn't take very long to figure that out. Well, here you have Gideon, instead of that out in the open, he's doing it in a wine press. Wonder why? All right. That's something where they can't see it. Now it's down here, we're threshing this, but it's in a wine press. In other words, it's hiding wine. Because Midian's going to take it from him if it is seen. And so here you have this guy trying to hide in this kind of a way of threshing the wheat. And now what takes place? We got this, the angel of the Lord again come. And what happens? Goes to Gideon, says to him what? You mighty man of valor, you're the one. And what do you see Gideon doing? I mean, you've got to get this. Gideon does not think he is a man of valor. It's almost like he said, who are you talking to? But what does he say? Okay. I'm the least in my father's family, aware of the least tribe. So I'm little. I'm nothing. You need to go find somebody else is the point. But what is God again showing? His power. It's not about Gideon's power. And so he says to Gideon, you're going to be the one I choose. You're going to deliver. And does Gideon say, okay, I'm ready to go? That's not what you get at that time. What happens? Okay. Show me a sign that I'm supposed to do this and that you'll be with me. So what's the first one? Do what? Okay. We're going to have dew on the fleece. If you really are going to send me and I'm going to be effective, night you make the fleece wet and not the ground. The ground dry. So what happens? Got up, and that's the way it was. Squeezes out the fleece, and what? It's absolutely soaked, is the point. When you get that amount, that's there out of that. So now what does he want to do? Okay, I'm ready now. I'll go. What now? Go the other way around. If you can do it that way, let me see it the other way. And so what happens then? Exactly what happens then. Now, what does God tell him to do? You go out. Left this part behind a little bit. You go and you see your father's altar that's there to Baal. What do you need to do with it? You tear it down. You take all of this stuff and tear that thing down. Why his father's altar? Is there anything seen in this pattern? Do what? Okay. And we're starting with this thing here against your father. While that has an element of his strength, of his standing up to his father and those that have done wrong, he's got to go a direction different. It still isn't saying, okay, now you go down, you go out and tear out every one of the altars that are all over the land here in this district. That's not what he does first. There's still a building, you see, that's taking place. And in that building that's taking place, the first thing is you go out and in that way. And what does he do? He tears it down and offers the sacrifice. Do what? All right. At night this is done. And I wonder why it happens at night. All right, there was fear that was there still. Have we got Gideon fully to where he needs to be yet? But that's what's coming later. As we talk about the next few chapters, we'll be dealing with that on Wednesday night, the Lord willing. We'll see this building effect. But what you see is something in some cases of Judges. God shows us different things. But one of the things that I think is absolutely essential is what he shows us with Gideon. And that is how you take somebody who is a coward, basically, to start with. He's not ready to do anything. He is thinking, I can't do this. Somebody else needs to be sent. And he takes that person. And while God is going to be the power behind it, what's he going to demand of those that he uses? That they're going to step up by faith to do what God says. You need to remember that in dealing with your life, and I need to remember it dealing with mine. I may not have a great amount of any talent that's there, and you might not either. But God can use us in a way that's unto his glory. But for us to let God use us, we have to be characters of faith. Because it's only a character of faith who says, I'm turning this over to God and I'm going to trust him. and I'm going to give the glory to God in all of it. And that's what you see when you talk about some of these judges. Gideon is a case like that, and it is an excellent case of what we see. Anybody else got anything there? Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to make the point about the fleece. It made me think about us in our lives. There's times where we may be like, if I just had a sign, then I'd be faithful for the rest of my life. If I had that acknowledgement, and we can see that he had that. He had proof that there was a God in front of him. And then he wanted another sign. And I think we do that in our lives just as well. Like if we had a sign, which we do, we have His Word, but
Yeah, and that's the whole point.
yeah,
We've got more signs than anybody ever has. Go ahead, Larry.
You see the same hesitancy in Moses, when God told Moses,
Yeah.
there's other people that are better than me.
That's both bad and good in one sense. We always need to make sure that our confidence isn't in ourselves. If it's in ourselves, that's called pride. And that's not good. The confidence needs to be in God. And if the confidence is in God, then the world's going to see that and I say, he's just arrogant, he's just proud, whatever. No, he's absolutely certain of God. And you can see the difference by who does the glory go to. And someone who's seeking their own glory will bring it to them. Somebody who's seeking the glory of God is going to talk about the cause of God and the cause of the Lord and what needs to be done there. That's the focus that always needs to be present. All right, let's do some questions here. Who was Deborah? Prophetess? A wife that was there and ultimately a judge of Israel too. Chapter 4 and verse 4. Where did she live? Pardon me? Okay. There, between two cities is given. Between Ramah and Bethel. Okay, number 2. Barak said he would go against Sisera on one condition. What was that? All right, Deborah go too. Where's that found? 4 verse 8, okay. How was Sisera killed? We already had that. All right. Died of a killing headache, right? All right, verse 4. What is asked about Dan in Deborah's song? Okay. Why did Dan remain on the ship? Chapter 5, verse 17. Why were the inhabitants of Miraz cursed? Okay, what passage is that? 523, okay. Let's drop down to the next one. Jabin, king of what? Reigned in, and who? Sisera, captain of the host, lived in Harosheth. 4 verse 2. Barak, with how many men? 10,000 met Sisera at the river Kishon. Chapter 4, 13 and 14. Skip one. Ford. Who is that? Speaks of herself as the mother in Israel. Why is that significant? How'd she view herself? Place of a woman there, mother that's there, not necessarily as the one who was the judge, the leader. She still is recognizing the place that she has, and it's God who calls her from there. Number 5, the kings of Canaan fought in Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo, and they took up no spoils of silver. Why is that significant? They took up no spoils of silver. Usually, what was that silver spoils? What had they done with that silver most of the time? They had made false gods. And so the point being made there, I think, is basically that. Number 7, because of the who? Midianites, Israel made dens in the mountains and caves and strongholds. All right, number 8. Gideon was the son of Joash of the tribe of, Manasseh, chapter 6, 11 and 15. Gideon was called what? Jerubbaal. What does that sound like? What did his father and mother named him after? After the false god Baal. That is the point that's being made out of this. That tells you something as well. Forgot to bring that out as we were going down. It says, let Baal do what? Plead against him because he hath torn down his altars, it says, chapter 6, verse 32. Okay. Number 9 then, or 10 rather. To show that God would save Israel by his hand, Gideon asked first that the fleece would dew and the ground dry, then for the ground to be and the fleece dry. Okay. Sisera had how many chariots of iron? All right, 900, 4-3. Who was it that was related to Moses' wife? Hobab. Okay. Chapter 4, verse 11. Barak gathered his army on Mount Tabor, chapter 4, verse 14. Who was Shamgar's father? Anath. Okay. Out of what area came down governors? Machir. All right, it is said. Then, number 6. Midian oppressed Israel how many years? 7, 6, 1. Joash was I made you pronounce that. See? That was 611. And then I gave that away. 8, Gideon said, I am the least in my father's house. Number 9, the bullock offered by Gideon was 7 years old. Okay, and number 10, how many men helped Gideon destroy the altar of Baal? 10 there. Okay. Let's just go through them real quick since we're almost out of time. Number 1. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Number 5. 6. 7. Getting old, isn't it? 8. 9. And then false for 10. Okay. 2 passages that tell of an angel delivering people out of prison after the church was established. Both in the book of what? Okay. First one. All right. Acts 5 verses what? 17 through 20. Okay. And then I heard somebody else, Acts what? 12. What verses? All right. 5 through 9 or 10 there. You can look at that. All right. Anything else there? How about that? I finally got to the questions one time. But we'll try to do that more as I can, if I can regulate my time a little bit better. But we'll get ready for the next lesson then. Lesson number 9 is what we're going to be working on next time, Wednesday evening, Lord willing.